Man, there's nothing like that switch in Luffy. You know the one, when he's all goofy, laughing, acting like nothing in the world can faze him. And then suddenly, it's gone. His eyes sharpen, his jaw tightens, the whole vibe shifts. That's when you know something big is about to go down. And when Luffy gets like that, you can feel it, because something unforgettable is about to happen. The kind of moment that shakes an entire arc, where the fate of his crew hangs by a thread. Like the fight that pushed Luffy beyond his limits at Enies Lobby. The jet Gatling that shook Enies Lobby. Enies Lobby wasn't just another battlefield. It was the stage where the Straw Hats drew a line in the sand against the world government itself. An island in flames with chaos raging in every corner. At the heart of it all stood Luffy, face to face with CP9's deadliest assassin, Rob Lucci. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for Nico Robin's freedom, for her right to live, and for the crew's unshakable bond. Lucci was cold, merciless, and terrifyingly strong, his Rokushiki techniques tearing through every attempt to stop him. Blow after blow, Luffy was pushed back, his body battered, his breathing ragged. But if there's one thing about Luffy, it's this. The more impossible the fight, the harder he digs in. And in that desperate moment, when his friends' lives depended on him, Luffy unleashed something no one expected. A storm of fists so fast, so furious, it felt like the island itself might crumble beneath the weight of his will. Each strike wasn't just power, it was rage, loyalty, and the unbreakable promise that he would never let Robin go. When the dust settled, Enies Lobby was no longer just a government stronghold. It became the place where Luffy showed the world exactly how far he would go for his crew. And as jaw-dropping as that was, it wouldn't be the last time his fists shook the seas. Soon after, Luffy would throw a punch that didn't just break a man. It shattered the illusion of an entire world order. The fist heard across Sabaody. If Enies Lobby showed us how far Luffy would go for his crew, Sabaody showed us just how dangerous his convictions could be for the entire world. The Sabaody archipelago was supposed to be a stopover, a pit stop before the new world. But the moment the Celestial Dragons stepped into the picture, everything changed. These so-called rulers of the world strutted around with untouchable arrogance, treating people as nothing more than property. For years, no one dared lift a finger against them, because striking a celestial dragon meant declaring war on the world government itself. But Luffy, he doesn't care about politics. He doesn't care about consequences. All he saw was a man brutalizing one of his friends, shooting Hachi in cold blood, and laughing about it. That's when the switch flipped, the joking stopped, the air went silent, and with every eye on him, Luffy walked straight through the crowd and threw a single punch that would echo across the seas. It wasn't just a punch, it was defiance. It was rage. It was a declaration that no matter who stood in his way, even the so-called untouchables of the world, he would never let his friends be treated like trash. And just like that, Sabaody wasn't just another island anymore. It became the place where Luffy shook the foundations of the world government with a single strike. And just when you think you've seen him at his peak, Another fight comes along that forces him to unleash a power so overwhelming it topples a tyrant's reign. Dressrosa's End, King Kong Gun Finale. Dressrosa was a kingdom trapped in chains, ruled by the iron grip of Don Quixote do Flamingo, a warlord who thought himself untouchable. His strings weren't just weapons, they were shackles, pulling an entire nation into despair. And standing against him was Luffy, already beaten, bloodied, and exhausted. Every bone in his body screamed to give up. But that's not Luffy. When a tyrant like Doflamingo crushed people beneath his heel, Luffy had only one answer: fight harder. Gear 4th was the weapon, but it came with a cost. Luffy's body could barely handle the strain, and time was running out. The birdcage was closing, the screams of Dressrosa's people filling the air, and still Doflamingo laughed, convinced that no one could topple him. But Luffy wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for Rebecca, for Law, for the Straw Hats, and for every single person who had suffered under Doflamingo's twisted rule. And then, it came. The moment when Luffy dug deeper than ever before, summoning a strike so massive, so earth-shaking, that it felt like the heavens themselves were watching. The King Kong gun wasn't just an attack. It was a declaration that no tyrant, no matter how strong, could stand in the way of freedom. As the fist came crashing down, Doflamingo's strings snapped, and with them, his reign of terror. When the dust cleared, Dressrosa wasn't in chains anymore. It was free, because Monkey D. Luffy had put everything on the line to break the impossible. And if you thought a battle against a warlord was intense, nothing could prepare fans for the heartbreak that came when Luffy's fists clashed not with an enemy, but with his very own crewmate. The pain of betrayal. Some of Luffy's most serious fights have been against enemies who threatened his crew. But this time, the enemy was one of his own. Water 7 was already tearing the Straw Hats apart. The Going Merry, their first ship, their home, was reaching its end. To Luffy, being captain meant making the impossible decision, to let her go. But to Usopp, the ship was more than wood and sails. It was family. The arguments turned into shouting. The shouting turned into heartbreak. And finally, it turned into something no one thought they'd ever see. Usopp challenging Luffy, his own captain, to a duel. From the very start, Luffy didn't smile. He didn't joke. He didn't play around. Because this wasn't just another fight. It was his responsibility as captain, and the weight of it crushed him. Usopp fought with everything he had: tricks, gadgets, and a will to prove himself. Blow after blow, Luffy took it, as if every strike hurt him twice. Once in the body, and once in the heart. But in the end, there was no stopping it. With one final attack, Luffy defeated Usopp. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He walked away with tears in his eyes, carrying the unbearable weight of victory. That night, it wasn't the Marines or warlords that broke the crew. It was the pain of seeing two brothers in arms torn apart by pride and heartbreak. And moments like this remind us, Luffy's seriousness isn't only about rage or rebellion. Sometimes it's about making the hardest choice of all, the kind that leaves scars you can't see. And as the seas kept testing him, even greater trials were waiting to push him further than ever before, the endless duel. Some battles are about speed, some are about strength. But this one was about endurance, willpower, and pride. Deep inside the Miro world, far away from the chaos of Whole Cake Island, Luffy found himself face to face with one of the greatest challenges of his life. Charlotte Katakuri. Katakuri wasn't just strong, he was flawless. With his advanced observation haki, he could see into the future, dodging every move before it even began. For the first time, Luffy wasn't just being outmatched, he was being outclassed. But that's what makes Luffy different. No matter how many times he was beaten down, no matter how impossible the fight seemed, he kept standing back up. Each clash pushed him further, forcing him to grow, to adapt, to fight not just for victory, but to prove he could stand on equal ground with one of the New World's most feared warriors. Hours dragged on. The battlefield became a wasteland of fists, haki, and raw determination. Katakuri's perfect image began to crack, while Luffy's spirit only burned brighter. And finally, after a marathon of punishment, Luffy landed the blow that proved his growth, not as the future king of the pirates, but as a man who refuses to fall, no matter who stands before him. The duel didn't just test Luffy's strength, it tested his soul. And walking away from that battlefield, he wasn't the same man who entered, because every fight that pushes him to the brink only forges something stronger. And somewhere out there, even greater forces were waiting to challenge that unbreakable will. Clash of the D's. Deep beneath the sea, Impel down groaned like a monster. Luffy wasn't there to make statements, he was there to save Ace, no matter what. He sprinted through the corridors, breath burning, allies scrambling to keep up, and then the prison seemed to stop breathing altogether. Standing in his path was the last face he wanted to see, Blackbeard, the man whose betrayal had set the world on fire. Recognition flashed. Jaya wasn't a memory anymore, it was a spark. Blackbeard spoke of fate and destiny, his mocking words dripping through the air. But Luffy didn't need a speech. He had only one answer. With a roar, he closed the gap and drove his fist into Blackbeard's gut. Pistol so raw that it sent the warlord staggering back, pain etched across his face. But darkness answers fast. The pull came like gravity with teeth. Blackbeard's Yami Yami no Mi dragging Luffy in, crushing him to the floor in an instant. And then, it stopped. Jinbei's voice cut through the chaos, hauling Luffy back before he could strike again. The clash ended as suddenly as it began. No victory, no truce, just unfinished fury. That day in Impel Down wasn't the time or the place, but the spark it lit would not be forgotten. Because even in the deepest prison on the sea floor, when D meets D, the world above can't help but tremble. Even in the deepest depths of the sea, that fleeting clash carried a message. When Luffy decides to stand, the world above, even the sky itself, will end up hearing about it. The Golden Bell Strike. Skypiea was a land in the clouds, but it lived under a storm of fear. Enel sat on his throne like an untouchable ruler, wielding lightning itself, as if no one could ever challenge him. To the people of Skypiea, he wasn't just a man, he was inevitability. But then came Luffy, a man of rubber, a man whose very body laughed in the face of thunder. The battle between them wasn't just a fight. It was a clash between arrogance and freedom, between someone who thought himself invincible and someone who couldn't care less about titles. Every strike Enel launched could have killed anyone else. But Luffy, stubborn as ever, kept pushing forward, each punch carrying the weight of the island's prayers. And then came the moment Skypiea would never forget. Luffy launched himself high into the sky, arms stretched farther than ever before, and with a single blow, he struck Enel down while ringing the legendary Golden Bell. The sound rang across the clouds, through the seas, all the way down to Jaya, the long-promised proof that the City of Gold truly existed. For Skypiea, it was freedom. For the world below, it was legend. For Luffy, it was just another promise kept. And if that strike lit up the heavens, there was another fist waiting that would shake the seas below. A punch that turned a town upside down and left its name burned into memory. The punch that rang through Mocktown. Before the seas trembled at his name, before he carried the weight of entire nations on his back, Luffy walked into a town of broken dreams, Mocktown. A place where pirates laughed at the sky and mocked anyone who dared to dream too big. It was here that Luffy met Bellamy, a man who spat on the very idea of ambition. To him, dreams were for fools, and laughter was the only response to anyone who looked beyond the horizon. Luffy stayed silent. He didn't argue. He didn't rise to the bait. But when Bellamy crossed the line, when he laid hands on Luffy's friends, stole their hopes, and laughed in their faces, that silence shattered. The moment came in an instant. Bellamy launched forward with all his swagger, bouncing with arrogance. And Luffy? He planted his feet, drew back his arm, and with one single punch, ended it. Mocktown went quiet. No more jeers, no more laughter, just the sound of Bellamy crashing into the ground and the weight of a dreamer's conviction ringing louder than any words. Because sometimes it doesn't take a storm of fists or a massive battle. Sometimes all it takes is one strike, sharp, precise, and unforgettable. And just like that, the world began to understand. Underestimating Monkey D. Luffy was the biggest mistake anyone could make. Declaration of war. Some fights are about fists, some are about power. But this one started with a single gesture. A gesture that told the entire world who Luffy was. On the rooftops of Enies Lobby, the Straw Hats stood against thousands. Robin was shackled, bound by chains and fear, convinced she didn't deserve to live. And Luffy, hearing those words, didn't hesitate. He pointed his finger toward the heavens and gave an order that still echoes as one of the most iconic in all of One Piece. Shoot it down. In an instant, fire lit the sky. The flag of the world government, a symbol of centuries of control, went up in flames. That single act wasn't just rebellion. It wasn't just defiance. It was war. The Straw Hats had declared themselves enemies of the greatest force in the world, all for the sake of one crewmate. And for Robin, who had lived her whole life in the shadows, it was proof. Proof that she wasn't alone anymore. Proof that she belonged. That day, Enies Lobby wasn't remembered for the government's might. It was remembered as the day a pirate crew, led by a straw-hatted captain, challenged the world with nothing but conviction and a burning flag. And if that fire declared war on the world itself, then the next fight showed us that Luffy's resolve burns just as fiercely against anyone who dares to cage his friends, no matter how terrifying the enemy. Never stand down. Before the world knew his name, before he toppled warlords and defied tyrants, Luffy made a promise in a small corner of the East Blue. A promise that showed exactly what kind of captain he was destined to be. Kokoyashi village lived in chains. Arlong ruled with cruelty, using fear and blood to keep the people broken. For Nami, those chains dug deeper than anyone could see. Her entire life stolen, her family crushed, her freedom held hostage by Arlong's grip. That's when it happened. Nami's tears, her plea for help. And Luffy, without a second's doubt, placed his hat on her head, his treasure, his pride, and stepped forward to take on her burden. The fight with Arlong wasn't just fists against Sawteeth. It was a clash of worlds, cruelty against loyalty, oppression against freedom. Arlong towered over him, confident in his strength, certain that humans could never defeat a fishman. But Luffy fought with something greater. Every punch, every strike was for Nami's pain, for her stolen years, for the family she longed to protect. And with one final blow, he brought Arlong Park crashing down. Not just the building, but everything it stood for. When the dust cleared, Nami was free, the village was free, and the world began to see what happened when Monkey D. Luffy decided he wouldn't stand down. Because that fight wasn't just about beating a tyrant, it was about proving what it means to have a captain who will carry your pain as his own. And soon enough, the world itself would test that resolve in a way no one could have imagined. Marineford Madness. The war at Marineford wasn't just another battle. It was the clash of an era. Admirals, warlords, Whitebeard himself, all gathered in one place, with the fate of Ace hanging by a thread. And right in the middle of it all was Luffy. He wasn't the strongest man there, not even close, but he was the one who refused to stop running, no matter who stood in his way. Every step was borrowed time, every clash a gamble against impossible odds. Kizaru's light, Aokiji's ice, Akainu's lava, powers that could erase him in an instant. He didn't defeat them, but with sheer will and the hands of allies pulling him through, he survived their might and kept pushing forward. And when all seemed lost, when Ace's execution was seconds away, Luffy's desperate cry cut through the chaos, a voice strong enough to reach his brother's heart. But Marineford wasn't just a battle. It was a nightmare that stripped away illusions. Luffy saw giants fall, legends bleed, and the seas themselves shake under Whitebeard's final roar. And in the end, even with all his desperation, he still faced the unthinkable. Ace dying in his arms, his brother's last smile seared into his soul. That day broke him, but it also forged him, because even in despair, his spirit refused to die. Marineford was proof. He wasn't ready yet, but one day, he would be. And out of the ashes of that war, his journey would only burn hotter, leading him to face kings, warlords, and monsters who thought themselves untouchable. Alabasta's final blow. The desert kingdom of Alabasta was dying, torn apart by drought and war. And at the heart of it all stood a warlord of the sea, Don Quixote Crocodile. With his sand powers, he ruled like a phantom, untouchable and merciless, convinced no one could ever defeat him. Luffy had already fallen to him twice. Poisoned, drained, left for dead, Crocodile had proven himself ruthless, the kind of enemy who believed hope itself could be buried under the sand. But that's the thing about Luffy. Defeat doesn't end him. It fuels him. And when he rose again, covered in blood and dust, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for Vivi, for the people of Alabasta, for a kingdom desperate for freedom. Their final clash shook the palace to its core. Crocodile sandstorms tore through stone and sky, while Luffy's fists slammed again and again, refusing to stop. And then came the strike that ended it all. A blow delivered with every ounce of rage, hope, and stubbornness he had left. Crocodile fell, the sky cleared, and the kingdom was saved. For Alabasta, it was the end of despair. For Luffy, it was proof that even warlords could fall. Because when he gets serious, no amount of power, sand, or shadow can bury the will of a man who refuses to back down. And soon enough, another so-called pirate overlord would learn that lesson the hard way. Facing down the Iron Pirate. Before Luffy's name echoed across the seas, before he was known as the man who toppled warlords, he faced down a different kind of terror. Don Krieg, the Iron Pirate. A man who commanded an armada of 50 ships and struck fear through sheer numbers and overwhelming firepower. The Barati wasn't just a floating restaurant anymore, it became a battlefield. Krieg unleashed poison gas, explosives, spears, and steel armor, determined to crush anyone who stood in his way. But Luffy wasn't moved by intimidation or firepower. While others saw an unstoppable fleet, he saw a tyrant hiding behind weapons, a pirate who only cared about control. And that's the kind of enemy Luffy could never walk away from. The fight was brutal. Luffy's body was battered by bombs, pierced by spikes, yet he kept rising, each punch a declaration that strength wasn't about armor or weapons. It was about will. And in the end, his bare fists broke through iron. Krieg fell, his reign of fear shattered, while the cooks of the Barati stood in awe of the boy who dared to take on a floating army with nothing but his resolve. That victory wasn't just another step forward. It was proof that no amount of weapons could crush a dreamer's fists. And soon, those fists would evolve into something even faster, even deadlier. The dawn of a power-up that would change the course of every battle to come. Speed and Fire, Gear Second, Unleashed. The battle at Enies Lobby wasn't just about Robin's freedom. It was about pushing the Straw Hats into a new era of strength. And for Luffy, that meant revealing a power no one had ever seen before. Facing CP9's Wano, a man armed with speed and the deadly techniques of Rokushiki, Luffy knew that raw strength wouldn't be enough. Every door Wano opened, every attack he launched, showed just how outmatched Luffy was. But then, something changed. Luffy crouched low, his body steaming, blood pumping faster, heat radiating from every pore. In that moment, he unveiled Gear Second, a technique that turned his own body into a weapon of speed and fire. The shift was immediate. His movements blurred, his strikes landed with impossible speed, and Wano, once confident, couldn't keep up. Every punch carried not just force, but the evolution of a captain ready to face enemies far beyond anything in the East Blue. Gear Second wasn't just a technique, it was the birth of a new level of Luffy, one that would shake the strongest fighters in the seas to come. And as Wano lay defeated, the real test of that power still waited ahead, against the most dangerous assassin of CP9. And if these moments of Luffy getting serious gave you chills, then you'll love what's next. On screen, you'll find 20 One Piece moments that fill your heart with hope. The kind of scenes that remind us why we fell in love with this story in the first place. And right beside it, check out Top 10 Most Formidable Pirate Crews in One Piece, because behind every legend is a crew strong enough to shake the seas.